Clara's musical dream. In a small, quiet town nestled among the hills of Austria, there lived a young woman named Clara. It was 1863, a time when life was hard for most, especially women. Clara's family was poor, and her days were filled with chores. But Clara had a special love for music. From the moment she heard the soft, melodic sound of her mother's lullabies as a baby, she knew that music was her greatest passion. Her family owned an old piano, a gift from a distant relative long ago. The piano had cracks in its wood, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. Still, Clara loved it more than anything. Every spare moment she had, she sat at the piano, teaching herself to play. She listened closely to the church choir on Sundays and tried to play what she had heard. Over time, Clara began writing her own music, creating melodies that seemed to flow straight from her heart. But in Clara's time, people didn't believe women could be composers. Whenever she mentioned her dreams, people laughed or shook their heads. Composing is for men, they said. Women are meant to sew, cook, and raise children. Clara's father even discouraged her. Music won't put food on the table, he often said. Focus on what's practical. Despite the harsh words, Clara couldn't give up. She worked harder than ever. Every morning, she woke up before the sun rose to practice her piano scales and write down the melodies swirling in her mind. At night, after finishing her chores, she stayed up late, scribbling notes by candlelight. Her fingers were often blistered from both work and practice, but she didn't mind. Music made her happy, even when everything else seemed hard. One day, Clara heard exciting news. There was a music contest being held in Vienna, Austria's grand capital city. The winner would get their composition performed at a concert, attended by nobles and other important people. Clara's heart raced. This could be her chance. But then doubts crept in. Could she really compete with men who had been trained in music their whole lives? Clara confided in her mother. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked. Her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, you have a gift," she said. "Don't let fear hold you back. Show them what you can do." Encouraged by her mother's words, Clara decided to enter the contest. She spent weeks writing her piece. It was a waltz she called the Starry Waltz, inspired by the nights she spent staring at the stars from her bedroom window. She poured all her emotions into the music, her hopes, her fears, and her dreams of a brighter future. When the day of the contest arrived, Clara traveled to Vienna. It was her first time in such a big city, and everything amazed her: the grand buildings, the crowded streets, and the elegant people dressed in fine clothes. Clara felt out of place in her simple dress, but she reminded herself that her music was what truly mattered. The contest hall was enormous and intimidating. Clara saw rows of men, all dressed in polished suits, carrying their sheet music confidently. They glanced at her and whispered, She could feel their judgment, but she stood tall. When her turn came, Clara walked to the piano. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the keys. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she thought of her mother's words and began to play. The room grew silent as her music filled the air. The delicate notes of the starry waltz danced like fireflies, soft and beautiful. By the time Clara finished, the audience sat in stunned silence. Then, the room erupted in applause. One of the judges stood up and said, "Miss Clara, your music is extraordinary. You are the winner of this contest." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had done it. She had proven that women could be composers too. After the contest, Clara's life changed. People began to notice her talent. Wealthy patrons asked her to write music for their events, and she received invitations to perform at concerts. One day, a messenger arrived at her door with an elegant letter. It was from the royal palace. The empress had heard of Clara's music and wanted her to compose for a grand royal ball. Clara couldn't believe it. She spent weeks working on her composition. She wanted it to be perfect. On the night of the ball, she arrived at the palace, feeling nervous but excited. The grand hall was filled with nobles dressed in glittering gowns and suits. The royal orchestra began to play Clara's music, and the sound filled the room with joy and elegance. After the performance, the empress approached Clara. "Your music is truly remarkable," she said. "Would you like to be our royal composer?" Clara was overwhelmed with emotion. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, bowing deeply. From that day on, Clara became one of the most celebrated composers in Austria. She wrote music for the royal family and inspired other young women to follow their dreams. Clara's story showed the world that talent and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Years later, people still played the starry waltz and remembered the brave young woman who refused to give up. Clara often smiled as she listened to her music being played, knowing she had proved that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, can come true.